I'm going to introduce the panel up onto the stage. We will be joined by our two morning speakers, Stephen Brobst and Venu. If you guys would like to just come up here. I don't need to reintroduce them, but they'll be joining the panel. And joining them is David Voorn, who is the product manager of Omni-Channel marketing at Salmat. So please welcome David to the stage. Salmat are one of Australia's leading and by far and away the biggest leading business about digital, end-to-end digital marketing agency, and are responsible or deliver over half of all B2C communications within Australia. So the conversation about relevancy and Stephen's presentation earlier is entirely at the centre of how Salmat behave and drives everything they do. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists a question first, and to hopefully get the creative juices going, and then you can ask questions to follow up. If you do put your hand up to ask a question, you have to say your name, or you don't have to. If you say your name, you'll get a chance to, as I say, to win the Kindle. So without further ado, I'm going to start with, I'm going to go through in order, actually, as you've sat down nicely in order. To you, Venu. We finished the last of these sessions back in May with a lot of conversation about discovery and proving capability. Projects are nowadays invariably business-funded projects, and they demand probably about a 6-month payback. So that window of payback is reduced dramatically over the years. Any business-funded project needs a 6-month payback. And in the world of discovery, you don't know what you don't know, or trust us, we'll get you an answer, doesn't really wash in terms of a business case. So in a risk-averse world, as we currently live in, how do you get around that?
Again, it's all based on what the incentive that you provide for people. Steve and I talked about this sometimes. So incentive of what the payback is going to be and how the payback is going to come. Again, it totally depends on how you deliver those paybacks, right? Question is in terms of whether the value add can be given incrementally or at a big bang. Typically, business doesn't drive in a big bang approach. It's very difficult. They always go incremental. So I think IT, talking from an IT perspective, I would say IT also has to adapt to that incremental ability to provide incremental benefits.
Good stuff. Anything from any of you other guys on that?
Well, just building on the idea of incentives, if you're not taking some risk, you're not innovating. And so, from a company culture point of view, you have to be able to accept risk, otherwise you're always going to be a follower. Maybe a follower is an okay strategy, depending on what you're trying to do. But when you think about analytics, the idea that you should put a return on investment case and then do some big project and so on, the reason that we're in that trap is because the projects take too long. And if the projects take too long and we spend a lot of money on them, we want to make sure that we get a return on investment. So we need to make it a lot cheaper to fail. Because if you're not failing sometimes, you're probably not innovating. It doesn't mean you always fail, right? Hopefully there's some successes there that are wildly successful and pay for all those failures that you did. We need to make it very cheap and fast to fail so we can move on and get to the good stuff. But it takes a different way of thinking about things. You can't have every project be a 9-month project and then you've invested all this money and nobody's willing to admit that you failed even if you did. Because then they don't get their bonus or they don't get their promotion or whatever it is. Good innovation involves failure explicitly, right? And yet we need to sort of build the capabilities to allow you to fail faster and cheaper, so the bar is lower, so then the successes relative to the cost of the failures is going to give you a good return on investment. You have to manage as a portfolio, not as individual projects.
Yeah. Okay, so follow-up question then, Srini, go on.
Yeah, just want to...
Hang on, the microphone's coming. I'll take follow-up questions on those themes, okay? And now I'll come to the floor for open questions.
I'm Srinivas. One question is that, risk while you admit and so that the failure rate can be accepted. However, the value, if it is not there in the first place, there won't be any business case, right? So caveat, in order to overcome that, what is your opinion, all three panel members, is that adopting the big data in the agile manner, in the methodology perspective, so that risk can be still managed and not in a waterfall methodologies that you wait until the end of the project?
Well, I think whether we're talking about big data or traditional data, this whole point of failing fast and cheap absolutely relies on this agile methodology, right? Because if we impose traditional methodology before we get to see any value, we've done data models and ETL and data dictionaries and all these kinds of things, now failure is not fast or cheap, right? Whereas agile allows me to sort of embrace the value of the data and be able to quantify value before I make the investments. Now, I think the danger when people say agile, they often use that as an excuse not to do some of those things. Oh, agile, great. That means we just get to go code and we don't have to worry about documentation and design and so on. That's absolutely not the case, right? What you're doing is you're changing the order in which you do things. You still want to do good design and have quality data and so on, but you don't need to make those investments up front. You can make them only after you've found the value in the data, and therefore you have a business case for making those kind of investments.
Yeah, it works more iteratively.
It's certainly good agile definitely involves iteration, right? And iterations is a tricky word because iteration often implies to people that you're doing SDLC faster, and that's really not what I mean, right? But you're delivering in much shorter time frames and you're refining the requirements as you go along. So if we count that as iterative, yes.
And from my opinion, I think in terms of even when you're innovating anything that you're doing, you need to have a place to get to. You need to know some sort of an end state, right? How you get there and what are the different aspects that you use to get there is innovation. You can either take it slow and steady to get there, or you can really try to understand what the next steps are and go iteratively from there, build on what you have gained and going through, right? Those kinds of, that is how I would say everything should have a direction, everything should have a start and an end point, so you know that iterations and innovation doesn't just keep happening in a la-la land. You need some business value, you need to know where you're going to get to or stop. Even the first iteration itself, you can stop and say, this is not going to generate value, let us stop. That does take guts on part of both the innovator and the knowledge of the business.
I think one of the key things that I got out of Venu's presentation, and it's the third time I've seen it now, was using a vehicle of an existing analytic process to enable the iteration of innovation. So you said, I think, 20 no's for every yes or something like that you talked about, right? But you had a yes that you were working towards with Affinity and with Customer Journey, right? Analytics that you already did and that you knew.
What you know, you can try, and in some cases, do you know, when trying to get there was fishing around a lot, frankly. We just, at that time, we had no idea what big data was. So in terms of even those, if you're going to innovate, you need to try and understand where you want to get to. So big data may be a case. Was big data a case for us? We didn't know. But at least we knew we wanted to understand big data. That's all. That is the guideline at least we used at that place. But we needed to then understand how is the business going to use it, right, to create business value. Then you start fishing around. You start understanding problems. It's not just big data. It is any problem you try to at least know where you want to get to, maybe. Or is it value add to even get there? And if it is not value add in the first step, stop. You're not wasting anybody's money. Right? That kind of a thinking has to be there. So you should have a vested interest in getting it that way, that it's your money, that it's not just the company's money, it's your money that's going down there. And that's the thought process that we try to inculcate internally, to say that, you know, it's your money means you won't waste it if there's no value, you'll stop.
So, David, a lot of this analytics, a lot of these iterations, a lot of the drivers for it are customer interaction,
yes.
And the alignment with marketing and clients. So, from a marketing perspective, what are the changing demands of data, and what are you seeing that people are looking to do with it?
I think, you know, Steve, this morning when you were talking about sort of like, I guess, a modern customer, and I probably see 3 or 4 large clients a week, and they're all hitting that point where they realize that the customer has to be at the center of their focus, the center of the universe. They've all looked at the Apple model, and it's beautiful. So they'll do anything they can with it, and they're aware that big data exists, and they will use it for any purpose they possibly can. But I think what we're moving towards is that VRM. It's just a brilliant sort of idea, and it's almost there. Not really in a push way, but a bit more in a push way from like a marketer's point of view, is that we know that we need to give complete relevance to all your customers. And I'll give like an example of a retail example. This is where it's going to really hit heavy in Australia soon. Is that we can't just keep on telling you what it is that we think you want. We need to take every trigger that we get, and that's every trigger from every single interaction that you have with the brand, which we now want you to love, not just enjoy, and then give you the right message at the right time via the right channel based on everything you do. Which I suppose from that perspective, my phone is almost like my VRM at the moment. I carry it around, I make decisions completely based on it. If I walk past a yogurt shop and I have a voucher for that particular yogurt shop, it tells me, oh yeah, you can get in yogurt, you get 10% off. What it doesn't do is know that I don't buy yogurt in winter. On Saturdays, I'm with my daughter, so I'm more likely to want to purchase yogurt at that particular time. So that gives all the power to me, perceivably, and make sure that my propensity to engage with these brands in exactly what it is that I want is very high. So from a marketer's point of view, they look out, and watching you guys speak was fantastic, because a lot of the time marketers, there's a massive assumption that that all this information is available, it's freely available, it's easy for us to do, and we can just do it. So we just make these broad, grandiose sort of campaigns, and spending a little bit of time understanding how to position that even more clandestine. It was wonderful.
Good stuff. Stephen, so we see that a lot of the data that's being provisioned often for marketing and client facing is coming from a network, big data, and there's often lots of networks, and we're understanding how people and processes and even machines interact with each other within a network of an organization. The custodians of that network are often a different beast and a different part of the organization than the client, the marketing people. And there's a concern about that data being passed to client-facing staff and understanding it, and having those people understand what the data means and how it should and could be used. So it's getting back to that question we were asked in Melbourne about metadata and how do you handle metadata. Is it more complicated? Is it different in a big data world?
I think it is more difficult because in the traditional sort of world of data, the data is already kind of pre-structured into record orientation, and we've coded values and so on. The quality is never what it should be, but at least there's been some effort put into that. What I observe in the big data world is because there is lack of traditional structure, we don't always know how to look at the data in order to get the value. Right? And in fact, in big data, I very often hear people use the term unstructured data. I think that's actually a term of ignorance. I think all data has structure, and anyone who says unstructured data is just a relational database bigot that doesn't know how to look at data in other ways than squares. And so we need to be able to look at data in different ways and have different tools for having access to it. And I think that there's going to be a radical shift in the marketplace. I'll go out on a limb and sort of predict that this is going to happen over the next few years, that we often, using traditional data warehouse building with ETL processes, extract, transform, load, we bind the structure to the data at load time through our transformation mechanism, right? Which presumes that we know how we want to look at the data. And for relationally oriented data, it's probably a reasonable assumption that we know how we want to look at the data. But for this non-traditional data, a very important technique in big data analytics that often gets lost in all the noise and the marketing hype is a concept called late binding. So in late binding, I'm actually not going to bind the structure to the data at load time. I'm going to bind the structure of the data at query time. And so without knowing in advance how I'm going to look at the data, I can load it in a pretty raw form. Think of ETL without the T, right? We're going to extract and we're going to load, and we're going to leave it in pretty raw form. And then, of course, if you don't do the T, you haven't made it go away. You've just kicked the can further down the street. Somebody eventually has to add structure to that data. And I believe that the BI tools are going to have to play a role in that. So I'm going to have to, at the time that I'm accessing the data, I'm going to tell you how I want to look at it. Now today, the BI tools don't know how to do this, because the BI tools, they expect the data to be in a record-oriented format in a relational database, and they're going to generate SQL and so on. The ETL tools generally know how to transform data, but they don't know how to provide a user interface, that can actually be used by a human, right? The ETL programmers I put in a different category. And so, there's going to be this convergence in this battleground where the ETL tools and the BI tools are going to have to converge. And I don't think they figured out who's going to own what part of the turf. And you see some of the ETL tools or data integration tools starting to move into this space. I think the BI tools are largely still clueless, with a few exceptions. But there's going to be a radical change in this environment where we sort of add the structure to the data at query time versus at load time. And it allows you to be a lot more agile in working with the data as well, to the point that you were making.
Great stuff. So to the floor and the hands up. Do I see any hands up? Yes. At the opposite end of the room from Fiona once again. So if someone down here could just prepare the next question, please, and we'll just keep bouncing around the room. Good workout.
Yeah, hi. Stephen, just to your point then around late binding and the BI tools, would the in-memory, the new kind of data discovery in-memory tools that are coming out in that BI space, wouldn't you consider that to be late binding? Because they can basically define what they're doing as they're building their reports and mapping the data in.
So in-memory delivers a performance benefit that's very, very good. But it's not enough. So I need the performance, and I need to be able to get the data very quickly, but I need to be able to structure the data on the fly, and that requires sophistication in the software to manipulate the data the way that I want to see it. In-memory is really just a facilitator of that. And so you need a lot more than just the in-memory capability. In-memory is the performance part of it. I don't view that as the hard part, actually. And I sometimes hear people in the big data space say, we have an all-in-memory solution. We're doing big data. To me, that's a contradiction, right? Anybody who says put all your data in memory doesn't understand big data, because the economics of that are irrational. Less than 20% of your data is what's going to drive more than 90% of your IOs. So when you've got huge amounts of data, the big part of big data, right, putting everything in memory is economically irrational. The data grows faster than memory gets cheaper. That's very important to observe, because people trying to sell this stuff will tell you memory is coming down 30% every 18 months on a compounded basis. And so memory eventually gets cheaper. You can put all your data in memory, right? And 30% reduction every 18 months is absolutely true. And if the only thing you understand is ERP data, I think that math works, because in a stable business environment, that's not going through some hyper growth, you're probably not going to get more than 30% growth in transactions and customers and accounts every 18 months. But if you're in a sophisticated analytic environment, and in particular if you've made the big data transition from transactions to interactions, what we would observe, and Venu's example certainly made this case, that the data will grow by more than 50% every 12 months. So data grows faster than memory gets cheaper. So you need to be smart, not big and stupid. Right? Big and stupid, put everything in memory. That's not very smart. Smart is get the right stuff in memory. And it's probably around 20% is the amount of investment you make in memory.
So that links well to a question that we had here, and a theme that came up in the previous event, where eBay presented their multiple platforms, as Andrew referred to it. So the question is, are the days of the integrated enterprise data warehouse numbered? Can we get away with federated hubs and avoid the overheads? Or do we need both? because EDW and Federated Hub play different roles, reporting versus analytics respectively. So that actually the question there is EDW reporting and Federated Hub's analytics? That's a sub-question, I guess, within that from Mark.
So
Stephen, keep going. Yeah, I suppose,
So
and then we'll go to...
So I believe, the whole big data phenomena puts the emphasis on use the right technology for the problem that you're solving. No one technology solves all the problems well. So in a sophisticated environment, you're going to have a range of technologies, and you're going to want to coexist the technologies, and we need to make it so that there's seamless is too strong a word. That's what I would like, but I think it's unrealistic right now. But I'll say easy ability to move data around between the different platforms to get the right data in the right place. So for example, in the unified data architecture, we have this Hadoop distributed file system that I can store all the data forever at a very low cost per terabyte, and that's very attractive. Right? And I can have the enterprise data warehouse, which is a relational database environment where I can sort of operationalize the insight and deliver value to the business and so on. Now, Hadoop distributed file system, I can store all the data forever, but it's not a database. And if I store data at a lower cost, but I don't get value from the data, then that's not so great, right? So the CTO at one of our large customers in the US, he once told me that we love Hadoop because we can store all the data forever at a very low cost per terabyte, but at the same time we hate Hadoop because the only people that can get the data out are the people that put the data in, because the tools just aren't mature enough. And so my data scientists, they shouldn't have to be flat file programmers. They shouldn't have to write Java and C++ in a MapReduce wrapper. And some of these scripting languages like Pig and Hive are so horribly inefficient. It's just you can't make good use of them, right? So you need a separate discovery platform, which I think is what Alex was getting into. So you're going to have an infrastructure to store all the data forever at the lowest price per terabyte. You're going to have a place where you operationalize the insight, which has good workload management and high availability and potentially disaster recovery and all those kinds of things. And then what we're seeing is the pattern at eBay, at LinkedIn, at Wells Fargo Bank, at all these places. They also have a discovery platform, which is where the data scientists live. And the data scientists, think of that as the R&D labs for the data. And they're bringing the data in. And we need to make it easy to bring the data from, for example, HDFS into the discovery platform. Right? Not all the data, right? But the data that I need. Think of it as a chemistry lab. And I have the common cheap chemicals that I use in my chem lab. And I probably got some of that from our enterprise data warehouse. It's all integrated and quality certified and so on, customer and product hierarchy and so on. And then when I want to get some exotic data, I go to the storeroom. It's not in my chem lab. I go to the storeroom, I bring it in, I experiment with it. If I didn't find value, okay, it's fine. I throw it away, I go get some more data, I try another experiment. I need to make it cheap and fast to do that. And then when I find something interesting, then I'm going to promote the data, probably from the Hadoop distributed file system environment, into the enterprise data warehouse where it becomes productionalized. So I'm differentiating between the manufacturing of the insights in the enterprise data warehouse from the R&D that's happening on the data discovery platform where your data labs exist. And then the storeroom, we've got low-cost storage of the data and so on in the Hadoop distributed file system. And I think you'll see other infrastructures come into play as well. So someone mentioned the in-memory stuff. So think about a SaaS in-memory appliance and participating in this as well in an infrastructure. So you evolve to a model where you've got this, we call it fabric-based computing, where on the compute fabric you've got different technologies and they all cooperate, and then you have tools to get the right data to the right place. But that does not mean that you're federating and taking terabytes of data from there and terabytes of data there and then sort of combining it in some other place. That's horribly slow to do that. So it has to be well architected, the approach that you use for getting the right data in the right place.
So Venu, you had examples of the multiple platforms, and you put some rock stars onto it. I think everyone's always keen to know what attributes, what was the DNA. You said that some people saw your presentation of the opportunity for their careers and jumped at it, and some people were less enthusiastic. What was the DNA? What were the things you were looking for in those people?
The first thing was curiosity and willingness to change, right? That's the first thing. Those are the two top capabilities. One, those two. And then do more than what they're doing right now. Those are the three. And then after that is the technology piece of it, is willing to accept and try new technologies, knowing SQL pretty good. if Java was there, and those kinds of, these are all technology attributes based on how you're going to do. You can Python, you can do Pig, you can do Ruby and Rails, any of those things. If they're doing and are willing to extend themselves, those kinds. So technologists that are great at technology and people that are great at building insights were the kind of people, and curiosity of that, right? Those are the traits that we saw. Of course, what we started picking up are those people that were straining our database on the EDW, which is used by everybody. That's the first people we went after. Said, you want more data? Come to this other place. Help me. Come to this other place, right? So you start getting, those are the people that are churning, willing to take the chances, because you're not going to let them do anything on the EDW at all. After 3 terabits, we lock them down because we want ETL to run, we want other analytics to run. That's typical. We said, okay, here's another place where you can come. They jumped. So those were the kinds of, at least the kind of people we chose for this. It's a bait that you give. You look at the kind of people that you want and look at the kind of things they want to do, and the bait that would help them get there, and go after them. You're innovating, you figure out which bait works right for whom.
Do any of them now work for Google or anything like that? They've just gone up and moved to California, yeah.
Have they moved? Yeah, I've lost a couple of them. To Sunnyvale, yes.
Yeah. Any questions anymore? Yes. Olivera?
Thank you. I have a comment, Olivera from University of Sydney. I have a comment about the future. Going back to your presentation, Stephen, thank you so much. You talked about the intention economy, and you talked about buyers will use technology to manage the relationship with sellers. There is also one more component there, and it's related to the previous discussion on data integration, because buyers could also become personal data integrators. In other words, rather than companies integrating data about you, so telecommunications companies getting data from retailers maybe, and integrating it all, you can actually integrate your own data across different aspects of your life, if you like. And that becomes a currency, because in addition to the technology that you have to manage your relationship, you also increase your buying power, because you say, what is the worth of one year of my data? And I think this is something that some people are prepared to do, and there are already some indications on the market, as you know, that companies are now providing services to end users to start to integrate data and kind of get an overview of their life as represented by different data traces. I would love to hear your opinion about it.
Absolutely. I believe that VRM software in the cloud that I talked about, it has the data about the consumer, right? So sometimes it's referred to as the quantified self, right? So you basically collect all the data about what books I've read, what music I listened to, and where I've been, and all these kinds of things, health, et cetera, et cetera. And that allows the VRM software, right? The VRM software needs to use data. The data is about me, the consumer, to help choose the things that are going to give me the most benefit. And today, some of that stuff already exists. So for example, in healthcare, there are things like Fitbits and other things that allow you to collect data, but they're in kind of islands of data which are functionally oriented. So we need to move to a more sophisticated model where the integration of the data, as was said earlier, right? If you marry these islands of data, 1 + 1 = 3, right? So we got to figure out how to do that, and then have software that takes advantage of it. Just like on our CRM software for an organization, the values when we integrate the data, the same thing's going to be true for the VRM data. But I'm going to integrate the data sort of about myself and my vendor experiences and so on to enable the VRM to make better decisions on my behalf. Absolutely.
I think so Jonathan from ABS talked about the skewing of data, though, based on who is currently providing information, particularly into the digital sphere. So, David, do you see issues and concerns with that, with the balance? Because ABS were talking about how they can rebalance some of that, and then the use of it into direct marketing.
No, of course. Well, I think you spoke about it before. There's a lot of cookies being placed on websites to capture huge amounts of information that that is used to, retarget, remarket, follow you around, chase you through Facebook, right down to an individual level, pull it right back, append our segmentation, then make sure that we, pop up a keyword somewhere at some time that triggers you off. I think the question is should we do it or can we do it? Probably, yeah, we can. Should we? From a marketing point of view, yes. I knew you'd pull that face. But see, the way I view it is pulling it back to that sort of customer at the center of the journey. So the brand has to evolve and be successful, has to listen to its consumers. It has to. Apple does that very well. So by placing you, the consumer, at the center of the brand's universe, the benefit is both ways. So should we? Yes. But should we based on what it is that we know you want us to give you and what it is that we can tell that you're going to say yes to? That's probably the better way to address it.
So as a consumer, I'm going to have my contract.
Of course you are.
Of what you're allowed to take and how you're allowed to use it and whether you can give it to someone else. So for example, in the US, there was a company, a bookstore called Borders. And Borders basically got put out of business by Amazon, I would argue. People have these kind of strong loyalties, and either you were a Borders person or you were a Barnes & Noble's person. Those are two main competing bookstores of the big chains. Typically, people didn't go to both. They were one or the other. And as they were liquidating all the assets, all the Borders customers and all their buying habits and all that kind of stuff got sold to Barnes & Noble without permission of the customers. And customers were very unhappy about that because they had a loyalty to Borders and they partially blamed Barnes & Noble for killing Borders, and now Barnes & Noble is sending them direct mail, and people got really unhappy about it. So in my contract, you will not be allowed to give my data to somebody else without my permission. And if you do, by the way, I'm going to charge you money for it because my data has value, to the point that Vanda was making. And then I'm going to also restrict what data you can have and how you can use it.
I think you said, again in your presentation about there are privacy concerns and people they get offended. I think Amazon did that really well. Amazon are very upfront about what they collect. They're very upfront about it. People don't view Amazon as being, for lack of better words, evil. Whereas they'll look at Facebook and go, you're evil. You're collecting my marketing information. You seem to be a little bit more clandestine about it. And I think the information that we're all willing to provide for even a small incentive. For instance, statistically, I think it's something like 43% of people will give you permission for free Wi-Fi. Like if you walk into a building and you're going to download an app, you'll just go, yeah. I think that's growing exponentially. And that's just for free Wi-Fi for that day. And that's free public Wi-Fi. I'm not even going to go into just how secure that environment is. And once we have that particular piece of permission, there is so much we can market off the back of that. So the idea of being a custodian of your own information, I think, as brands evolve, that'll be part of the risk of the marketing programs, that they need to make sure that they're completely upfront about why I collected this, what I'm going to do with it, and then they'll ensure that the right customer gets the right message and that person is a fan.
Absolutely. Do what you say and say what you do, right? So that there's a transparency and then there's adherence to what you're telling people you're going to do. And Amazon is a good example who is transparent, and they also give the customers control over it. So I can tick things off and say, don't include this in my preferences because I don't want it, right? Yeah. So there's also a level of control that's given to the consumer. It's a great
debate that rages on, and we hear it a lot in the public sector, of course, as well, which is why I think hearing from ABS was very interesting. So I'm going to thank our three panelists because we're out of time, and if you clap and applaud them as they leave the stage, thank you. And thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you.